against India. And this sentiment is now sweeping across the public who want to teach Turkey a lesson. Indian tourists are on a boycott Turkey spree. Indian travel companies are reporting anywhere between 25% to 50% cancellation or drops simply in Indians who are planning to travel to Turkey for the summer vacation. Is this a fleeting threat like we saw with Maldives last year, where there was boycott Maldives, it was a huge trend, there was outrage across the country, it lasted for a few weeks, and now tourist arrivals from India into Maldives are pretty much at levels as it used to be. But the question with Turkey is, Turkey has consistently taken Pakistan's position, first in the grouping of Organization of Islamic Countries, the OIC, or even otherwise. In this instance, there are very real concerns that Turkey sent drones just before the flare-up between India and Pakistan. There's evidence of Turkish drones, the Bayraktars, being used by Pakistan to target various Indian cities. So the question is, will this boycott Turkey trend on social media actually end up hurting the Turkish economy, or are Indian tourists simply a drop in the ocean compared to the large number of global tourists who visit Turkey? But first, let's talk about this business of calls for boycotting travel to Turkey and to Azerbaijan by Indian tourists. Now, this comes after both of these countries openly supported Pakistan in the ongoing hostilities between India and Pakistan. As a result, many Indian travelers are cancelling their trips, and that is leading to a significant shortage or a drop in bookings to go to Turkey. Ixigo, which is one of India's foremost travel agents, travel apps, they have said that when it comes to Bharat, we don't think twice. Ease My Trip, the second biggest travel app in the country, says, and I quote, "We strongly recommend visiting only if absolutely necessary." Cox & Kings, which is again a big travel agency, sometimes a pause becomes a necessity. Travel Mint has decided to support the call for boycotting Turkey and Azerbaijan. Go Homestays has announced that they have officially ended their partnership with Turkish Airlines. Goa Villas will not offer any accommodation or services to Turkish citizens who may be planning to visit Goa. Pick Your Trail has also echoed that when national interest is at stake, then we stand with India. Now, here's the thing. There is no formal ban from the government of India or even a travel advisory from the Ministry of Civil Aviation for Indians against them traveling to Turkey or to Azerbaijan. But here is what is at stake if both countries have to bear the brunt of Indian tourists in a large scale not showing up in either of these two countries. In Turkey, in the year 2024, there was a big jump. 3.3 lakh Indian tourists visited Turkey in 2024. That was a 20% increase from the previous year. So one extra tourist for every 5 ended up going to Turkey last year. By industry estimates, about $500 million in revenue are at stake for Turkey just from Indian tourists. Azerbaijan saw about a little under 2.5 lakh Indian tourists in 2024. That again was a whopping 100% increase from the previous year. By industry standards, $350 million in revenue is at stake if this tourism trend continues in the country of Azerbaijan.
अज़रबैजान और तुर्की ने टेररिज्म की बहुत हेल्प करी है, उनको ड्रोन्स और असला दिया है। तो हम अपील करते हैं, जो हम लाखों लोग जाते हैं इन दोनों देशों में, तो हमें उम्मीद है कि इसको हम बाइकआउट करेंगे।
जो भी टर्की से इंपोर्ट आ रहा है, वो जब तक टर्की पाकिस्तान का सपोर्ट कर रहा है तब तक हम उसको, टर्की से जो आने वाले माल को हम स्वेच्छा से हम इंपोर्ट नहीं करेंगे, क्योंकि पाकिस्तान जो हमारा दुश्मन कंट्री है, उसका पूरी दुनिया में किसी ने सपोर्ट नहीं किया पाकिस्तान का, और टर्की खुलकर टर्की का सपोर्ट कर रहा, पाकिस्तान का सपोर्ट कर रहा है।
The most of the people immediately voluntarily said, let the money go, but nation is first. So that's why we decided, कि come on, we'll cancel it, whether we get the refund or not refund. Our life is also important. Plus, why we should support now, henceforward, no tourism will take place in Turkey and Azerbaijan.
So, Turkey's stand has been especially eye-opening because supplying arms to a country is one thing. Turkey, in fact, even openly batted for Pakistan during the recent conflict. While India did Operation Dost back in 2023 when Turkey faced a massive earthquake, Pakistan used Turkish drones to attack India, including the TB2s, the Bayraktars. While India set up a field hospital for Turkey, Turkey docked its naval warship, a corvette, in the Karachi port to support Pakistan. While India sent medical teams and essential supplies, equipment, etc. to Turkey in the aftermath of the earthquake, Turkey called for action against India's terror provocation. In fact, it was one of the fundamental provocateurs behind the OIC, Organization of Islamic Countries statement that came out condemning India's actions against Pakistan. Now, the question is, will this actually impact bilateral relations between India and Turkey? India's economic engagement with Turkey has acquired a new momentum in recent years. There's a considerable increase in trade. It stood at a little over $10,000 million, about $10 billion as of 23-24. As per the Central Bank of Turkey's data, Indian companies have invested about $120 million in Turkey, in Turkish businesses, in Turkish investments. Turkish investments into India are a little higher than that at $210 million as per the Department of Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade here in India. There are approximately 3,000 Indian nationals who are residing in Turkey. Most of them happen to be in Istanbul. India helped Turkey in times of crisis. Like I said, Operation Dost was launched in 2023 to provide urgent relief to Turkey in the wake of devastating earthquakes in the country's southern provinces. 3 NDRF teams and a 99-member medical team were deployed in Turkey. Over 250 trained Indian personnel, along with specialized equipment, vehicles, and relief material, actively worked in search and rescue operations. Operation Dost was among the earliest foreign helps that arrived in Turkey. India also sent medical equipment and relief material, about 8.5 tons worth of equipment and relief, to Turkey in the aftermath of the earthquake. All right, so a lot of travel portals and companies and apps are also saying that they will not allow for bookings to go through to Turkey. One of them is one of India's largest, Ease My Trip. Prashant Pitti is the co-founder of Ease My Trip, the travel app. Thanks very much, Prashant, for speaking with us. Why did your company decide not to allow bookings for Turkey? I believe it's a very popular destination for Indians. Last year, more than 3 lakh Indians visited Turkey. Why did you take this considered decision, and how many cancellations are you seeing since you took this decision?
Well, thank you for having me on the show, Zaka. Zaka, you should not see this as an isolated moment of Ease My Trip. We have always been nation first. If you would remember last time India and Maldives had a trip, we were the first and the only OTA which actually boycotted Maldives, and we cancelled all the flights, all the hotels and the packages of Maldives and gave full refund to the customers for about 9 months' time. Backwards to apologize to India, ran the campaign, Welcome India. Their tourism minister came to our office, Ease My Trip's office, and our external minister went to Maldives. Then only we resumed our flights 9 months later. And during these 9 months, there were 0 flights, 0 packages which were booked on Ease My Trip, while all our competitors were still selling Maldives packages. So this is not an isolated moment. Ease My Trip stands with India and will continue to stand with India. Now, very recently, when we can see that there's a war-like situation between India and Pakistan, countries like Turkey and Azerbaijan have chosen to stand on the wrong side of the history. And when I say wrong side of the history, it is very, very evident. Pakistan is caught with its pants down. At the funeral of UN designated terrorists, we are seeing army personnel standing over there, shoulders to shoulders with them. What more proof does the world need to call Pakistan a rogue nation? And yet, you are choosing to stand by with Pakistan is very, very careless, according to us, on their behalf. Now, given that, as the second largest travel portal in the country, we decided it is our responsibility to issue travel advisory to people to not to travel to Turkey and Azerbaijan. This time we did not cancel the flights. We issued travel advisory because Turkey is a major layover hub. Okay. People just go to Turkey to take another flight to go to Europe or US. So we could not differentiate, which is why we have put the advisory. We were the first ones to put the advisory, and we are glad that on the basis of our efforts, other OTAs have taken the same call. And right now, you're seeing boycott Turkey and boycott Azerbaijan trending on the social media.
So how many cancellation requests? Do you have a number on how much as a result of this the hit to the bottom line has been as a consequence of this?
See, the real hit is going to take time, but so far we are seeing 22% tickets to Turkey and 30% tickets to Azerbaijan being already cancelled by the customers.
Okay.
Since we have put the advisory, these cancellations have come in, and since this is only 6 days old, we believe this number is only going to go up. In cumulative sense, almost about 5 lakh passengers have traveled to Turkey and Azerbaijan from India last year. Even if we take modest 1 lakh rupees spent in the entire itinerary per tourist, we are talking about 5,000 crore as the total amount which was spent on either of these two countries. And unlike Maldives, which changed its stance very quickly, I believe that Turkey and Azerbaijan will have difficulty changing their stance because it is stemming from their ideology, from being an Islamic nation, from giving them trades and ammunition. We believe that this standoff between India and Turkey and Azerbaijan is going to continue for a longer period of time, which is why this 5,000 crore multiplied over the period of time will surely make them feel the heat. And in fact, the heat is already felt. Only yesterday, there was a clarification which came from Turkey's tourism department to encourage people from India to continue coming over there. So, which is something which they are realizing. And I believe that this could only be the beginning for the country. See, it's not just the tourism, which is the trade between India and Turkey and India and Azerbaijan. There's so many other industries where import and export is happening. Using your medium, I would like for other entrepreneurs to consider not working with these countries which are adversaries to our country.
We're already hearing from, marble importers and apple importers, etc., who don't want to take in Turkish goods. But one final word. You did mention earlier that, this is an advisory and you can't stop people from using Turkey as a layover. Turkey, I believe, is a very, very popular layover. Istanbul is a popular layover to travel to Europe or to travel to the US. What would your word be to those folks? Because I believe those tickets are also quite cheap compared to other European carriers or American carriers.
See, basically, if someone is affording to travel international, they can afford to spend 5% more in the name of the country. And especially knowing that the monies which we are giving to them will come back and haunt us in the format of drone is something which any person who respects our nation, stands with the nation, should be able to take a call. If it's only 5% more inconvenience, let me put it this way, it's worth taking that inconvenience, because if, at the end of the day, it is coming back to us, to our kids, in the format of future of better India.
All right, Prashant Tithi, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much. Co-founder of Ease My Trip, one of the portals now that has come out and said that they are advising their clients and their patrons not to travel to Turkey or to Azerbaijan. All right, India and Pakistan have fought 4 wars in the last 75 years of their existence. In each of these wars, the scale of operations, the level of technology used, the risk involved has substantially gone up. Even though the last 4 days of last week, which eventually ended in a ceasefire on Saturday evening, the 4 days after Operation Sindoor, both countries were precariously placed with drones and jets and missiles flying around. Asim Munir called Kashmir the jugular vein. India went for Pakistan's actual jugular vein, which is the Pakistan army. That is the one thing that has been achieved. India has shown that there are a range of sub-nuclear options that are available to India to make the Pakistan army pay a heavy price for its low-cost, asymmetric warfare using terrorist proxies. Here's an explainer into how India managed to do that. When India and Pakistan clash, the world often is forced to sit up and take notice. It is seen as another episode in a long-running bitter rivalry. Religion and Kashmir add to this potent mix. Then there is the ever-present threat of terrorist attacks. Cross-border skirmishes follow, then there is a lull for a few years, then repeat. This has been the pattern for the last 30 years. Even US President Donald Trump summed it up wrongly, but this is what he said.
They've been fighting for many, many decades and centuries, actually, if you really think about it.
India and Pakistan came into existence only in 1947, 75 years ago. The world's growing concern is not hard to understand. These two countries, India and Pakistan, have fought as many as 4 wars and maybe right now are fighting their 5th. They've also traded both military and diplomatic fire on a number of occasions in these last 70 plus years. But this time feels different. It started with the terror attack in Pahalgam in Kashmir last month. 26 Hindu tourists were killed. In the days that ensued, it has now escalated into military strikes. And that shows how the old playbook may no longer apply between Delhi and Islamabad. The guardrails are falling, and much of this change comes from how far these two countries, India and Pakistan, have diverged in the last 20-odd years. India is rising fast, both economically, politically, and strategically. Prime Minister Narendra Modi promotes India not just as a nation, but a global civilization which is ready for its moment. Pakistan, he argues, is standing in the way. New Delhi no longer sees Pakistan just as a nuisance. It is a serious threat, particularly when it comes to Kashmir and when it comes to cross-border terrorism. Pakistan, on the other hand, for the last 2, in fact even 3 decades, has struggled. It has faced economic troubles, political crises, and security threats. Through all of this downturn over the last 2 or 3 decades, one power remains strong in Pakistan, and that is its army. It's got nuclear weapons, it's got conventional military strength. The army still drives key decisions, particularly when it comes to India policy. Pakistan and the Pakistan army are not going to back down easily. Kashmir is not just disputed land for them, as the Chief of Army Staff, General Hassan Munir, said a few weeks ago. Kashmir is the jugular vein. It is the core part of Pakistan's national identity. In the past, India has often held back. Even after the 2008 Mumbai terror attack, in which 166 people were killed, India avoided escalation. It continued with the dialogue. But over the last 10 years, Prime Minister Modi has changed that. India's approach has been much harder. It's isolated Pakistan diplomatically. It has launched overt and covert operations in Balochistan and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa to try and break up Pakistan once again. The first dismemberment of Pakistan happened in 1971, with the separation of East and West Pakistan. 2025 could possibly see the next. Pakistan's military, too, has at times shown restraint. Most famously, during the last set of clashes in 2019, when Pulwama happened and India struck back through the Balakot airstrikes, the Pakistan army, under then General Bajwa, had backed a ceasefire in 2021. India accepted the ceasefire and it held for about 4 years. But now that has changed. There is a different army chief who is ideologically steeped in very visceral hatred for Hindus. He in fact had that speech where he said Hindus and Muslims are fundamentally 2 different people and the twain shall never meet. And in response, India wants to press ahead for the jugular. India's goal this time seems bolder and braver. It wants to apply long-term pressure. It sees a weak civilian government, a discredited army chief. The aim of India this time is to change Pakistan's political landscape. It wants to weaken the army's hold. It wants to shift the balance of power permanently in Pakistan. After the Pahalgam terror attack, Indian leaders have now adopted a much harsher tone. Some are calling Pakistan a failed rogue state. Others are saying now is the time for India to press ahead with its advantage and to bring down Pakistan completely. Pakistan too has sensed this shift. It is no longer hoping for peace with India. It is also preparing for a long drawn-out confrontation. For the Pakistan army, this is a bitter battle for survival. The danger in the subcontinent is rising. India recently suspended a 1960 water-sharing agreement which regulated the Indus waters. That is a lifeline for Pakistan. 80% of its agricultural output depends on the Indus waters. Islamabad has long warned that cutting off water would be construed as an act of war. In return, Pakistan has threatened to tear up the 1972 Shimla Agreement, which established the de facto border or the line of control in Kashmir. If that were to happen, if Pakistan were to disregard Shimla, then nothing prevents India from crossing over the line of control and forcibly taking over Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. In fact, there are very vocal sections within the BJP, the ruling party, which want Prime Minister Modi to do exactly that. But the timing could not have been worse for the entire region, in fact, for the entire world. The United States, which once used to be the crisis manager of the subcontinent, has stepped back. In the past, Washington has often saved the day. In fact, back in 1999, then US President Bill Clinton had helped directly to end the Kargil war in Kashmir. After the terror attacks on India's parliament in 2001, after the Mumbai attacks in 2008, US diplomacy had helped ease tensions and even pushed for justice. Even after the 2019 Balakot strikes, Mike Pompeo, the then US Secretary of State, details very much so in his book how he had multiple late-night conversations with Sushma Swaraj, then India's foreign minister. But that doesn't seem to be the case anymore. The Biden administration over the last 4 years kept its distance. Why? Because it wanted to stay on India's good side. Washington wanted India as a counterweight to China. The Trump administration now has also taken a hands-off approach. J.D. Vance has given an interview to Fox News saying that this is not our business, it's for India and Pakistan to fight and figure it out. In fact, the Trump administration has also come out louder in support of Prime Minister Modi and his government, but it is also too distracted right now with the trade wars with China, the Ukraine conflict, the escalating situation in Gaza, and of course the talks with Iran, which have just begun. And frankly, New Delhi does not want foreign mediation anymore. It sees foreign intervention as giving Pakistan a platform and an off-ramp. Pakistan, on the other hand, does not trust American diplomacy, particularly as the West grows closer and closer to India. Back-channel talks and hotlines at the levels of the military leadership and the security leadership, which once used to help manage these crises, are now quiet. And that is dangerous. The fact that there are no direct contacts between India and Pakistan is exacerbating the situation. None of this, though, justifies global indifference. The Ukraine war has already shown that even nuclear threats are not taboo anymore. And both India and Pakistan are nuclear-powered countries. If India finds limited strikes to be ineffective, then India could potentially escalate. That could push both countries, India and Pakistan, closer to the nuclear red line. The human cost of a full-blown war along the densely packed border between India and Pakistan would be staggering. Together, these two countries hold nearly 1/5 of the world's population. The United States and other world powers must realize what is at stake. India is vital to Washington's Asia strategy. India is seen as a key partner for America to challenge a growing hegemonic China. In order to try and boost regional security and to grow trade, America needs India, and it needs India right now. But if India stays locked in a constant state of tension with Pakistan, then it cannot fully play the role that America expects of it. Meanwhile, Pakistan will lean harder and harder on China. That means even less American influence in a country of 250 million people that is strategically located and that has nuclear arms. Those very same nuclear arms, there is a grave danger, could also fall in the wrong hands. Now that is a bad deal for everybody, particularly for the United States and for India. It makes India's ability to challenge China much more complicated than Washington thinks it would. So the onus really is on these international powers, the United States, the Western countries, even the Gulf Arab nations, to try and intervene and mediate and to try and calm down tempers in a way that India and Pakistan are not on the brink of nuclear Armageddon. Meanwhile, coming back to focus, remember there were two battles that were happening. One on the battlefield, which India has clearly and decisively won, and another one on the airwaves and on social media. Yalda Hakim is a journalist and TV presenter who recently drew attention for confronting Pakistani ministers with her tough and uncomfortable questions. Yalda, a news presenter with Sky News now, has caught the eye of many across the world for challenging Pakistan's long-standing denial about promoting terrorism. In her widely shared interview from the 24th of April, Pakistan's Defence Minister Khwaja Asif admitted that Pakistan has supported, trained and funded terrorist organizations for 3 decades now. In his words, we've been doing this dirty work for America for the last 30 years. Her follow-up interviews with Pakistan's Information Minister and the High Commissioner of Pakistan to the UK further cemented her role in trying to expose the Pakistani deep state and their support for terror.
Well, we have been doing this dirty work for the United States for about 3 decades, and West, including Britain.
So Yalda is an Afghanistan-born journalist. She fled with her family and resettled in Australia as a refugee. She's reported live from global hotspots including Israel and Gaza, Ukraine, Afghanistan, Iraq and Darfur in Sudan. She's a high-profile interviewer. You heard from her interview of Khwaja Asif, the Pakistani Defence Minister. Yalda Hakim has also interviewed world leaders like Ukrainian President Zelensky, Tony Blinken, the former US Secretary of State, former US President Bill Clinton, former Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, Sheikh Hasina, the former Bangladesh Prime Minister. She also runs a foundation to support education for young Afghan girls through scholarships. So there's a great degree of media interest, not just Indian news media or Pakistani news media. Certainly international news media has been glued to the India-Pakistan story, the terror attack that happened in Pahalgam and subsequently the military action that India took, and then the escalation that happened over the last 3 days, and finally the de-escalation over the weekend. So a lot of international news media have been reporting about it, have been covering the story, have been interviewing important personalities who are right in the thick of the action. One such person is the Sky News journalist Yalda Hakim, who's now joining us. Thank you very much, Yalda, for joining us here on CNN News 18. I know you're joining us from Saudi Arabia. You're covering President Trump's visit there, so thank you for taking the time out. I want to start off by asking you, what drew you to the India-Pakistan conflict situation, as it were? I know your family originally is from Afghanistan, so you're from this part of the world, if I can use that phrase. But really, in terms of a news story, what drew you to it? What was so fascinating about it for you to cover as a journalist?
Zakaria, thank you so much for having me on your program. As you say, I mean, the region has often interested me. I've covered stories from India, from Pakistan, from Afghanistan for many years, from the very beginning of my journey as a journalist. But I think beyond that, this was and remains an incredibly important story that I feel that, frankly, Western media continues to miss and doesn't quite understand. They don't understand why Kashmir is such a flashpoint. They don't understand why it is such a hot topic for both India and Pakistan. And beyond that, the fact that you've got two nuclear armed rivals that could be at the brink of war. I think even in this instance, what is now alarming, which is being, again, missed by Western capitals and their leaders, is the fact that certain red lines have now been crossed and that baseline has now moved, which means the next time there is a flashpoint, we are going to have those lines across yet again, and it could become even more dangerous than, frankly, this time round from 2019 and the various other moments where there has been conflict. But my main frustration in my newsroom, whether it was at the BBC or at Sky News, frankly, is a real lack of fully grasping the importance of this this conflict, not just for the region, but the entire international community.
It's interesting you said that every time there was a terror attack and there was subsequent military retaliation by India, the envelope was pushed a bit more. The chain of escalation went up a bit more. And so was the case now as well. Traditionally, it was always thought that two countries that have nuclear weapons, will not attack each other because that's the ultimate form of deterrence, if you will. But over the last 3 or 4 instances, has India sort of changed the game or moved the envelope in a way that Pakistan cannot use these terror proxies and hope or imagine that there will not be a retaliation or there won't be a consequence, or take refuge behind the nuclear weapons and say, India can't hit us because we have the nuclear weapon?
I think it's a little bit of both. I interviewed Ambassador Amar Sinha very early on after the Pahalgam terrorist attack. And at the time, he said that, we can't continue to be told that there will be this nuclear threat and therefore we can't take action, and that we have to tolerate a terrorist attack on Indian soil time and time again. And I think that it's one of those things where what is most concerning is that not only is Pakistan a nuclear armed state, which of course India is too, but it also does have this policy, for those who know Pakistan's history and its relationship with terror organizations, backing them, funding them, supporting them, giving sanctuary to terrorist organizations, whether it was in Bahawalpur or other parts of the country in the tribal belts. They have done that for decades. And I think what's often missed is, because Pakistan comes out and denies these, it is often bought by journalists and, frankly, diplomats around the world. The United States spent decades giving billions of dollars to Pakistan in the war against terror, knowing that they were providing sanctuary for these terrorist organizations. And so the finger of blame is often pointed at India for taking action off the back of one of these attacks. And I think that, there is huge difference between India and Pakistan. India is now a great power, and Pakistan is a weaker power, and it is still finding itself not cracking down on these terrorist groups. And fundamentally, that is the issue. But these are questions that aren't necessarily asked of Pakistani authorities.
So when you did ask that, and now it's become an interview that's gone viral, internationally, when you did ask that to the Pakistani defense minister, and he said pretty nonchalantly, I thought, that's what we've been doing all along. That's what we've been doing, this dirty work for the United States and for the West for the last 30 years. When he said that, what was running through your mind? Did you feel like a gotcha moment?
The first time I heard Pakistani authorities say this, I was at two instances before this defense minister's interview. One was when President Hamid Karzai had made a trilateral visit to Islamabad with then Asif Ali Zardari as the president of Pakistan, and Ahmadinejad, the president of Iran, was there as well for this trilateral talk. And I stood up and I asked the Pakistani authorities about the double game that they were playing. And at that time, there was a sort of flurry at this particular press conference, because you were just supposed to ask, very cordial questions of all of the different leaders who were there. So there was frustration at me for asking that question. The second time I asked was when I interviewed General Pervez Musharraf, and at the time, he was a retired general living in exile, and he said to me, yes, we use them as proxies. It shocked me, but it didn't generate any kind of news, because the timing and because he was retired, and he was sort of saying it in passing. I think what shocked me this time round was that the current defense minister of Pakistan, at a moment where the country could be at the brink of war, off the back of the Pahalgam terrorist attack in Kashmir, when I asked him this question, I thought they would go through the normal process of denial. So I think I was quite shocked. In that moment, I sort of didn't know how to take it. And I just wanted to give him even time to clarify, because I actually thought he misunderstood my question. He went further on to sort of confirm what he'd actually said to me.
So why do you think, and you referenced this in your previous answer as well, it's not just against India that Pakistan has used these terror groups and terror proxies to target Indians, but they've used this against Afghanistan as well. Why do you think then the international community has given such a long rope to Pakistan and not held it accountable for this? Because any other part of the world, if a country had been doing this as almost like a policy for the last 20, 30 years, they would have been held to account. Why then hasn't it happened with Pakistan?
And when you look at the number of incidents, Zakir, I mean, you look at the murder of Daniel Pearl in 2002, an American journalist in Karachi. Just weeks earlier, he had reported on the fact that terror camps and madrasa seminaries were flourishing, despite the Pakistani authorities saying that they were launching crackdowns on them. When you look at the billions of dollars that have been invested in Pakistan in the so-called war on terror, when you look at the fact that Osama bin Laden was discovered by Pakistan's ally, the United States Navy SEALs, were sent there in an operation that was completely secret. I mean, when you're giving a nation billions of dollars, they're fighting terrorism with you, and yet you're too afraid for the information to leak to the authorities, and in secret you enter Pakistani soil and you kill a known terrorist that is known to be behind 9/11. I mean, that in itself was quite extraordinary, and in that moment, big questions should have been asked of Pakistan. Why is this man being, this terrorist, this known terrorist, being given sanctuary just a few kilometers away from a major military installation and headquarters? It wasn't until 2018 when President Donald Trump was surrounded by a number of people who fully grasped and understood the Afghan-Pakistan file and understood what, and you know, you'll remember that Donald Trump surrounded himself by a number of 3- and 4-star generals at the time who'd fought and operated in Afghanistan, so they knew firsthand what Pakistan was doing, and they encouraged President Trump to take away military aid from Pakistan. And then, you know, in the years after that, Pakistan, there was a threat of putting Pakistan on a grey list, the Financial Action Task Force, of a state sponsor of terrorism, and then they sort of took certain action, arresting certain jihadis and terrorists, putting them in prison. So Pakistan has had this long history, and yet, as you say, it's baffling that to this day, whether it's Washington or London, haven't been able to, other Western capitals haven't been able to hold Pakistan to account for having that policy.
All right, one final word, and I think you also started off by referring to this about the frustrations about international media not getting the scale of this conflict or how much it could escalate. What are the frustrations here in India, certainly within government, maybe even amongst ordinary Indians, is that the Western media it doesn't quite get India's point of view when it comes to this issue, because they still, you know, parrot a very old narrative that Kashmir is a disputed thing, and you know it's between India and Pakistan and so on and so forth. Whereas for India, for the last 20 years, certainly, the fundamental issue has always been about terrorism, and somehow it feels like the Western media narrative does not portray India as the victim and Pakistan as the perpetrator, but more like, you know, this is a historic dispute and these two are equals, and there is a degree of hyphenation, if you will. Is that a valid concern, and how can that concern be addressed?
I think that, you know, to my earlier point, that India, its economy, where it stands now on the international stage, this extraordinary partnership that we've seen for the last 25 years between Washington and Delhi, this bipartisan partnership that they have developed. And we've seen Prime Minister Modi was one of the first leaders to go to Washington and meet with Donald Trump in the Oval Office. So there is an understanding of Delhi's importance, certainly when it comes to the rivalry with China as well. And yet I think that Delhi, India, hasn't necessarily done a very good job in highlighting the issue of Kashmir and the issue of terrorism in Pakistan enough, frankly, because I think in many ways, you know, India is a population of 1.4 billion. It sort of focuses internally on its internal affairs and issues. And then when a flare-up like this happens, it sort of takes certain measures, and the world is quite confused about why it's come to the brink, not fully understanding what was the underlying issues under the surface. And so one of the things that I've sort of said in previous interviews is we don't often hear from, you know, Indian officials talking about these things, not just in this period where there's a flashpoint, but in other times as well. And to be fair completely to Pakistan, they are willing to put up their defense minister, their interior minister. They're willing to come to the cameras, regardless of how the interviews end up and the accusations. They're willing to take the tough questions and deal with it. And I think that is one of the things that perhaps culturally is a difference between India and Pakistan.
All right, Yalda Hakim, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for this fascinating conversation, and thank you for what you've been doing through your work, through your journalism, in highlighting this flare-up between India and Pakistan. As you said, an issue that many in the West may not necessarily care about. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
US President Donald Trump has implored Ukraine to accept a Russian proposal for direct talks rather than insist on a ceasefire first. The leaders of France, Germany, the UK and Poland had visited Kiev and set a deadline of Monday for Russia to accept a 30-day ceasefire. Otherwise, they warned that Russia will face additional sanctions. When President Vladimir Putin of Russia made a counter-offer of direct talks without mentioning a ceasefire, France and Germany both rebuffed the proposal. In fact, President Trump's envoy to Ukraine, who was also part of the talks, General Keith Kellogg, had said earlier that Russia should halt the hostilities as a first step in the negotiations. But Trump wrote in a post on Truth Social that President Putin of Russia does not want to have a ceasefire agreement with Ukraine. The Russian leader, according to Trump, wanted direct talks to be hosted by Turkey later this week in Istanbul. Ukraine should agree to this immediately, Trump wrote on his social media post. Zelensky responded pretty cautiously to the Russian counteroffer for direct talks. He once again insisted there has to be a halt in the fighting before there can be any talks. But after Trump's post, Zelensky added a new twist to the ongoing diplomatic brinkmanship. Zelensky said he would personally be attending the negotiations in Istanbul. Putin, when he proposed those direct talks, did not intend for a presidential meeting, did not intend for a meeting between himself and Zelensky. He just said direct talks, but at a junior level. Zelensky's declaration in a post on X did not clarify whether his participation would depend on Russia first accepting a ceasefire. But he once again called on Russia to halt the hostilities to allow for diplomacy. The flurry of exchanges came hours after Putin effectively rejected the Monday ceasefire deadline, and instead he proposed that direct talks between representatives of the two countries take place this week in Istanbul. Before setting the Monday deadline and threatening additional sanctions, European leaders had spoken with President Trump on the phone from Kiev on Saturday. They said that the United States would also impose sanctions on Russia if Putin did not agree to a truce. But Trump started singing an altogether different tune. In February 2025, US and Russian delegates met in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, to try and discuss improving relations and also to put forth plans to end the war in Ukraine. Notably, in that meeting, no Ukrainian or European delegations were invited to that summit. Additionally, there was a further follow-up meeting in March where American and Ukrainian representatives met in Jeddah, again in Saudi Arabia, to discuss these peace negotiations. America had to restore aid and also intelligence sharing, both of which it had previously cut off to Ukraine after that stormy meeting at the Oval Office between President Trump, President Zelensky, and Vice President J.D. Vance. Since initiating the efforts to end the war in Ukraine 3 months ago, the Trump administration has aligned more closely with Russia. It has voted with Russia in a United Nations vote. It has also resumed broader diplomatic ties with Moscow. It has left in place existing economic sanctions, but not ramped up pressure with additional sanctions, even as Vladimir Putin has shown very little signs of pulling back in the war. In fact, President Putin has expressed no agreement with a US proposal for a 30-day ceasefire. He says the terms still need to be worked out. He's been dithering on this 30-day ceasefire proposal. Putin instead says that any cessation of hostilities should lead to a lasting peace, and that can happen only if they address the root cause of the conflict. Putin has also expressed concerns that Ukraine might use this ceasefire period of 30 days to try and rearm, and that is exactly what he wants to avoid. But the Trump administration has something else that it needs to contend with. Civilian casualties have risen quite alarmingly since the Trump administration first began ceasefire talks a couple of months ago. If you were to look at the civilian casualties between then and now compared to the same period a year ago, and this is data from the United Nations, there is a substantial increase in the number of civilian casualties, and that is something Trump is concerned about. Ukraine back in March had agreed to an American proposal for an unconditional ceasefire. Russia, though, is still holding out. In addition to Putin's call for direct talks, the spokesman from the Kremlin also said that Russia will only accept a truce if Western governments stop supplying arms to Ukraine. None of the Western governments have agreed to that just yet. President Trump has taken a generally conciliatory stand towards Russia. He's offered major concessions to Russia, including barring Ukraine from NATO forever, recognizing whatever territorial gains Russia has made in the Donbass, which is in the east of Ukraine. However, Putin has not budged. He has shown no willingness to compromise, and that has led to a degree of frustration from the Trump administration. Despite this, Putin maintains a level of engagement with Trump, possibly to keep diplomatic channels open and also to leverage the situation as he feels to Russia's advantage. But the Europeans are seeing through Putin's game. President Emmanuel Macron of France called Russia's response insufficient, even as he was just leaving Ukraine. He said it was a first step, but it was not good enough. Macron also said that Putin was stalling with his counter-offer of direct talks, and he simply wants to buy time. It's a sentiment shared by the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, who supported Zelensky's demand that Russia first has to agree to a 30-day ceasefire before there can be direct talks. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey spoke with President Putin. He told him he was willing to host the discussions between Russia and Ukraine. Erdogan also said that a comprehensive ceasefire could lead to a lasting deal which will put an end to the war. But who will end up going to Istanbul is still up in the air. The Kremlin declared a unilateral 3-day truce last week around the country's celebration of Victory Day, which is the anniversary of the Allied forces' victory over Nazi Germany. Ukraine's military did confirm that most long-range strikes in that period had halted, but fighting along the front lines continued without a pause. Russia resumed its long-range drone attacks on Ukraine overnight starting Sunday after the 3-day ceasefire expired. So US President Donald Trump is on a multilateral visit to the Middle East. He is stopped over in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. He's in Qatar as well as the United Arab Emirates, all meant to secure major investment deals to bolster the American economy. Trump described himself as a peacemaker while he was addressing the US-Saudi Investment Forum in Riyadh. He reiterated the claim that his administration had helped broker peace between India and Pakistan in order to avert a potential nuclear war between both countries. He went on to say, if at all a nuclear war would have broken between India and Pakistan, it could have killed millions. India has, of course, unequivocally rejected any kind of third-party mediation. It's maintained that the ceasefire understanding with Pakistan was arrived at in the result of direct discussions between India and Pakistan. But the US president continues to insist that it was American mediation that paved the way for this temporary peace between Delhi and Islamabad. Let's first listen in, and also we'll try and analyze some of the big announcements and the big deals that have been signed in Trump's very first foreign visit in his second term.
Just days ago, my administration successfully brokered a historic ceasefire to stop the escalating violence between India and Pakistan, and I used trade to a large extent to do it. I said, fellas, come on, let's make a deal. Let's do some trading. Let's not trade nuclear missiles. Let's trade the things that you make so beautifully. And they both have very powerful leaders, very strong leaders, good leaders, smart leaders. And it all stopped. Hopefully it'll remain that way.
All right, so he's made this point on a number of occasions now since Saturday when that ceasefire was announced. Stephen Kalin is the Middle East correspondent for the Wall Street Journal. He's now joining us. So, like I said, Stephen, I mean, he's mentioned this on social media yesterday in Saudi Arabia a couple of times. I think there was an instance somewhere in Riyadh in one of the occasions where he was speaking. He also referred to both J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio and saying that they played a role in bringing about this peace. The government of India, of course, maintains officially that no such thing happened. They may have been sort of via media communication, but ultimately whatever was arrived at between India and Pakistan was arrived at bilaterally. Why do you think Trump continues to say this? I mean, is it for political expediency? Is it to claim credit? We know that he's a peacemaker. He's been trying to do that with Russia, Ukraine, with not much success, I must add. He's been trying to do that in Israel versus Hamas, again, with not much success. So why do you think he's doing this in the context of India and Pakistan?
Yeah, I think it's part of his larger strategy to present himself as a deal maker, both in commercial terms and also in geopolitics. He spent a large part of his speech last night in Riyadh talking about how he wanted to bring peace to the region, sort of the Middle East and the broader region, including India and Pakistan. And this is really what we heard last night in his speech was sort of a repetition of what he said before on social media, what the government, what the White House and State Department have said before earlier this week and last week about the role they said they have in helping to resolve this. And then, of course, also the Saudi foreign minister also shuttled between both countries last week to try to play a role. So I think it was very much in keeping with the mood that President Trump was trying to set. He's obviously looking to resolve there are a lot of conflicts going on in the world right now, and he's looking to play a role in ending as many of them as he can. We're also, just sort of a few miles away. The president's a few miles away in Doha now from Iran, where there are negotiations have been ongoing for a month or so now between the U.S. and Tehran on ending that, resolving the nuclear issue and preventing potential other nuclear conflict. So very much in sort of keeping with the larger message he's been sending on this trip.
So just break that down for us, because this current trip, this is his first visit in his second term as president. So he was in Saudi Arabia, he's in Qatar, and then he goes to the UAE as well. These are all Gulf countries, and they have been historically against Iran, against Tehran. And the US has had multiple conversations with Tehran in the last few weeks about its nuclear program. How is Trump trying to sort of append the traditional alliances and cleavages that we know of in the Middle East? He also, I believe, at some point yesterday said that Saudi Arabia will eventually join the Abraham Accords, which is a normalization with Israel, but they will do it at their own time.
Yeah, the region is really, the Middle East is really being reshaped in many ways in the last couple of years. Since October 7th, obviously, the Israeli response to those attacks included, not only going after Hamas, but also going after Hezbollah in Lebanon. That played a role, of course, in the collapse of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad at the end of last year, who was an ally of Iran. There have been direct exchanges between Israel and Iran. So I think there's sort of a broader reshifting and scrambling of traditional alliances. The tensions between Saudi and Iran have been ongoing for decades. They sometimes are more tense than at other times. Sometimes there's sort of moments and periods of rapprochement, which I think the president is trying to encourage that as well. He drew pretty clear lines in his speeches in Riyadh that Iran, he won't accept Iran having a nuclear weapon, and that they need to stop their funding of proxy groups across the region that are helping to destabilize other countries. The push for normalization with Israel, between Israel and Saudi Arabia, was notable. It came at the top of his speech, but it was quite subtle. He told the Saudis that he thought it would be good for them and good for the world, but also that he knew that they would do it on their own time frame, because at the moment, with the war in Gaza raging and no real movement to a two-state solution in Israel and Palestine, it's really kind of a non-starter with the Saudis right now. And then the third issue, of course, is Syria, where he agreed to lift sanctions, and that has the potential to really reshift some alliances as well.
Co-presented by This is News 18 Network. India's largest news network.
That was a fantastic discussion going on there, and I wish I could have joined you, because it was really, really insightful. But we're joined by Lauren Dagan-Amos, who's in India specialist. She's a foreign policy expert. Thank you very much for joining me. There are many, Ms. Amos, there are many who are saying that if India was in such a strong position against Pakistan, why did it agree to what is effectively a ceasefire without preconditions? That is what is being said here in our country. First, what is your assessment of the Indian military action and its subsequent decision to agree to an understanding, so to speak, that has led to a ceasefire.
So thank you so much for having me here. It's a complex answer, but it's very straight. I don't think that India went to ceasefire without agreements, without conditions. Okay. As you can see, this crisis, it's not the usual crisis between India and Pakistan. It's a strategic shift that India did in the foreign policy, in the strategy, defense policy. India responds not only with military efforts, but with a clear message. Terrorism will no longer be treated in a separate issue. It's an act of war, and it's very important. It's this very big shift in the foreign policy and defense policy that Narendra Modi brought to India. Even now, we can see in the de-escalation, India is showing that it's not a weakness; it is strength. On India terms, I think India went from this crisis very strong, actually.
Very strong. Well, there is a lobby here that says that India should have signed they should have dragged Pakistan to the table and signed a formal ceasefire agreement in writing. How realistic and responsible is this observation?
I think that if India wants to be a responsible country, which is, she needs to do something with the Hindu agreement and the Shimla agreement. It's very important because these agreements was the basic talking with India and Pakistan during a crisis time. And it's very important that you should go back to the table, and you will see what can you bring now, which kind of new agreements about the Indus agreement and Shimla agreement. So before the ceasefire, I think these two agreements are very important.
My final question, do you see parallels between India's action after Pahalgam attack and what Israel did after October 7?
I think that India and Israel, not for the first time, are dealing with extreme radicalism, Islamic. And I think India and Israel should do a deeper relationship in the security issues and the policy issues and the economy issues, because they are dealing with the same threats. October 7, it's for India, it's like a Mumbai attack, right. And like 9/11, and like you did deal now with the Kashmir issue. And I think for both of the country need to do much deeper a relationship now, because it's very important, and we can do better for each other. We can learn from India, and India can learn from us in the field of battle, of course. As you can see in this combat, a lot of things that Israel and India went together to do things was successfully showed the means and the prove ourselves. The relationship prove ourselves.
Viewers, when Pakistan cornered and crippled, sent out desperate feelers for a truce, it was not Prime Minister Modi who blinked, it was Pakistan that begged after it was bled. And yet, the usual chorus of politicians in India, Sanjay Raut of the Uddhav camp, Atishi from the Op, Jairam Ramesh from the Congress, have suddenly discovered their faux patriotism. Their accusations that Modi sold India out when the military was dominant has shattered the image of an opposition standing with the military and the government in this time of extreme crisis. Viewers, I want us to take stock of what is being said, and I'll just give you one example before I let you hear the individuals for themselves. This is Atishi, who is the leader of the opposition in the Delhi Assembly, and she says, and I quote, "The Prime Minister claimed that Pakistan folded its hands and he showed mercy. But where is the proof of that surrender?